oftentimes in our day-to-day, we are operating as the adaptive child in us, which essentially means I'm operating as I would in child me who had to adapt to the environment in order to preserve self or preserve the environment around us in order to stay safe, emotionally or even physically.
Welcome back to the Core Happiness Podcast. If you have ever wondered why you keep repeating the same patterns over and over again, either in your daily life or in relationships, or why it's so hard to feel truly seen and supported, then this episode is for you. Today, I am joined by Julie Hall, a licensed marriage and family therapist who helps individuals and families heal deeper emotional roots behind those patterns. Julie's work blends compassion, mindfulness, and trauma-informed therapy to help people move from survival mode to genuinely feeling safe and connected within themselves and their relationships. This is one you do not want to miss. Well, Julie, welcome to the show. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I want to talk about so much with you today, but first I want to talk about your background because it is unique in terms of spanning business with tech and therapy. And so can you just tell us a little bit about what inspired your shift from kind of that fast-paced corporate world to a world of healing and emotional well-being?
So yeah, that's right. I was in tech for about 10 years before I pivoted into the therapeutic space. And the impetus of that really was, certainly it's always been part of my personality to just talk with people and talk with people in depth and have in-depth conversations with people about their stories. Never thought of it as a potential career path. But through the course of my life, I got married and my partner and I, we were really excited to expand our family, and we started to have a lot of trouble trying to get pregnant, and we were navigating some pretty significant fertility issues, and we were seeing medical professionals. And quick story, there was a doctor we were working with who we trusted, and we were sitting across the table from him, and he kind of just slid me a business card of a psychologist who worked in the practice with them and said, you might actually benefit from seeing this person. And I'll tell you candidly, initially I felt somewhat offended because I thought, we're navigating so many issues medically, biologically, and the meaning I made of that naively is that, you're basically telling me something's wrong with my head, right? Or something's wrong with me. And that's just because I really didn't have a real understanding of the therapeutic space. I didn't grow up with people going to therapy unless there was something quite severe going on or really significant mental health issues, but it was certainly stigmatized. All that said, I was curious. And so I did go to that appointment. I made the appointment, went to the appointment, and I will say it was like the floodgates opened for me. I had no idea what I was carrying. All of the emotional turmoil that I was navigating, all of these talk tracks that were in my head that were blocking me. And it was just this real beautiful outlet for me and incredibly helpful. And I certainly know that's not everybody's initial experience with therapy, but it was mine. And it really catapulted me into wanting to shift careers and be a support for people specifically who are navigating fertility issues, because at the time I just didn't feel like there were a lot of resources for us, for couples, for individuals. And so I went back to school and I made the change. And that was about, however many years ago.
That's quite a story.
Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful one. And I know you talk a lot about your goal for your clients is for them to feel seen and to feel valued.
Yes.
And I'm curious, is that what you felt when you said the floodgates open for you? Did you feel seen and valued, and that is kind of that initial turning point that was like, I absolutely want to do this?
Absolutely. I felt seen. I felt valued. I was really given the message that what was happening in my internal world was important and worthy of being seen, honored, understood, tended to, cared for. And and that has certainly been my mission in my work with clients.
And I think that's so incredibly powerful. And I'm curious, just because, a lot of our listeners are high achievers who are living up to these expectations, roles, responsibilities, this idea of having it all together. And there always kind of seems to be a struggle of who I am, but then how I want to be perceived. And there is sort of this gap, I would say, between being successful, but then also truly being authentic and being seen. And so I'm curious, why do you think it is that people struggle with being seen or going to therapy to uncover some layers? Why do you think that is?
I would say that it's difficult for us to navigate life with vulnerability, right? Often people feel that when they go to these more tender places, I think even subconsciously, the story they tell themselves is that whoever is across the wave from them that they're talking with as far as their own vulnerability won't be able to hold it. Or if I even engage my own vulnerability, I won't necessarily know where to go from there. So it's scary, right? I always say vulnerability is like a trust fall. And you don't want to be dropped, right?
Yeah.
And so often people fear that they are going to be dropped. And so what they do instead is often their protective measures, right? Whether it be masking, whether it be, anything that's particularly performative, or trying to make sure they can control all the pieces, or particularly with high achievers, I see a lot of that. Or they want to just keep moving. Let me just keep moving.
Yeah.
But we know that the vulnerability, or like the pain that we carry, it doesn't go away. It will manifest sideways. It will manifest in anxiety symptoms, relational breakdowns, depressive symptoms. And so the intention of expressing in these ways is if we can engage some of these more tender places in our story intentionally, then we really minimize the risk of them coming out sideways.
Yeah.
And harming us and harming the people that we care about.
I know that you work with family systems, and when you talk about the feeling of not being held, or not wanting to be vulnerable, or putting on that mask, I'm wondering if that plays into the family systems, and if how we are behaving as adults stem from maybe early family dynamics.
Absolutely, 100%. There's a framework of what's called operating as the adaptive child versus the wise adult. It's quite almost like self-explanatory, right? Like oftentimes in our day-to-day, we are operating as the adaptive child in us, which essentially means I'm operating as I would in child me, who had to adapt to the environment in order to preserve self or preserve the environment around us, in order to stay safe, emotionally or even physically, right? So adaptive child might be the person, behaviors might be, I will people please. I'm going to people please. Or adaptive child might be, I have to be perfect, right? Because the message I got when I was a child or in my family system was, if I, operate this way, if I can people please, or if I can stay hyper vigilant, if I can be responsible for all the things, if I can get like the perfect grades or be perfect in all these ways, then I will be affirmed. Then I will be valued. Then I will receive love, right? And so then as we get older, we continue to operate in that way as the adaptive child. And so what we really try to do, what I try to do in the therapeutic space, is help people recognize when they're showing up as their adaptive child versus what it looks like to show up as the wise adult. The wise adult is the part of us that we want to really elevate. We really want to strengthen. It's the person who knows better. right? The person who
Yeah.
recognizes that there are multiple parts to self. And so it's like the evolved version of us.
One thing that I hear a lot is when people are struggling with self-worth, it seems to stem from those conditioned beliefs from adolescence. But in your work, how would you describe these early dynamics and how they affect our sense of self-worth? I mean, especially for women who are feeling like they must hold it all together. And you mentioned people pleasing,
Yeah.
and you mentioned having to do certain things to feel a level of worth. But I'm curious if you have seen in any specifics in terms of how those dynamics just affect our overall self-worth.
Yeah, I think if we continue to operate in the ways of the adaptive child, I think they certainly start to, or just continue to chip away at our sense of self, right? Our understanding of self. And so I think it's really critical to recognize what the adaptive child looks like. I would say we cannot heal what we do not acknowledge. So it's critical that we acknowledge that we can name what the behaviors of the adaptive child in us look like. So in my work with clients, it's the lens of relationship. All the issues that we are navigating really come down to what's happening in our relational dynamics. So almost always with clients, I will engage very specific work around their genealogy or family system. So I will look at your grandparents' generation, your parents' generation, and your generation, and we're looking for threads. We're looking for threads in 3 areas, right? The first area is relational patterns. So things like, how was love given? How was love received? What were the different communication styles? How did we know we were in conflict? The second area of focus is what we call narratives. So narratives are essentially the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves about the world around us. And those just don't come out of thin air. Those are essentially handed to us based on how we are responded to or not responded to in our formative years. So that's things like, what do we value? What do we consider to be success? What do we consider to be failure? Right? What do we consider to be good? Who do we consider to be good? What do we consider to be bad? Who do we consider to be bad? And then the third area of focus is trauma. And trauma, there are obviously a lot of different definitions out there of trauma, but the one that I have found to be particularly poignant, all-encompassing, is actually the definition by an author. His name is Resmaa Menakem. He wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands. And he says that trauma is anything that happened to us that was too much too fast, too much too long, or not enough too long, where we didn't receive adequate support or resourcing. And trauma really impacts how we see ourselves in the world around us, our narratives, and how we move through the world, right? Our relational patterns. And so it's really important, I think, for me when I work with clients to go through this so that they can, not to rehash, so to speak, but to help them understand where they are coming from, right? What they are bringing, often subconsciously, into their adult relationships, what they're carrying with them. Because the more that we can do that, the more opportunity we have to shift from this kind of self-criticism, like what's wrong with me, to what happened to me? What happened to me in my lived experience that has created these kinds of adaptive, at a point in time, moves that are no longer adaptive. They are probably maladaptive for me. So really building up like our own sense of self-compassion, not for the purpose of dwelling on things or giving myself a pass, but really what we know about self-compassion is it actually opens up the centers of our brain that tell us we are capable of growth and change. So self-compassion isn't giving ourselves a pass. It actually accelerates our growth, right? If we're engaging it effectively. And then the other reason that I do this family work, again, we cannot heal what we do not acknowledge. So the acknowledgement component, and then it's helping clients recognize that they actually can be empowered to make different choices. I always say there's like an inverse direct relationship between anxiety and empowerment. The more anxious I am, generally, the less empowered I feel. the less anxious I am, the more empowered I feel. So the more that I can really look at my own family history, the more opportunity I have to say, you know what? That value that was part of my family lineage for so long, it's not necessarily serving me. So I want to leave it there. Or this particular way of loving, I think actually is important for me to bring forward, right? So we're making these really intentional decisions based now on very explicit knowledge. That was a very long-winded response to your question.
No,
about
but that's
family.
that is packed with so much. Especially when you brought in compassion. One of the things that I've seen, at least in the clients that I see, is that self-compassion is one of the hardest things that people have trouble accepting or working on. And
Casey, preach. Yes.
I think it's one of those things, though, where it sounds nice, but it's hard to practice in the day-to-day. And then I'm thinking for someone who grew up in that environment where their emotions weren't safe or their needs weren't being met. Like, I don't know if you have tips or suggestions, but like if somebody's listening and they were in that environment and they do struggle with that self-compassion, how can they begin to build that sense of safety and self-trust as an adult?
You're asking the real questions here. It's that is it's very difficult. It is very difficult to shift from a I would say like this kind of negative motivation, right? This sort of like almost like self-deprecating or self-critical kind of motivation to a self-compassionate motivation. There's always a function of anything that we do. And so often this self-critical lens that we have, the function of it is to motivate, is to keep me pushing myself forward, right? It's so I don't let my foot off the gas, right? And often there is this story that we can tell ourselves that if I am gentler with myself, I'm going to let everything go. Then I'm not going to be, succeeding in the way that I want to succeed. So often I really do try to give clients some of the psycho ed around self-compassion, like what it actually means, like what we're actually looking at here. The self-criticism often keeps us somewhat hijacked in fight or flight, hijacked in the scarcity model. And when it's very difficult for anxiety and creativity to coexist. It's very difficult for me to engage creativity, healthy problem solving when I am in full fight or flight. And so I think it's really important to, again, engage clients in what self-compassion actually means, some of the research around self-compassion, and then we actually talk about practice, right? Practice around what it actually looks like to engage compassionate ways of moving through the world. For example, regulating your nervous system, what it actually looks like to tend to your physiology. When sensors are going off for you, often what happens is we just kind of like white knuckle through it. Then we're just sort of like white knuckling through our day to day until we hit the end of the day, and then we're back on the hamster wheel, right? And what that, again, can very quickly do is move us into burnout. Yeah. And there are all kinds of like symptomology around burnout versus what it looks like to tend to what our physiology is communicating to us during the day. What are some of the tells, for example, that are communicating to me I am feeling anxious? Notice the tells in your physiology. Maybe I start to fidget. Maybe I like hunch my shoulders up. And so as you start to notice your tells, what I really try to help clients just practice is tend to those tells. Drop your shoulders. Do some breath work. Right? I want to help them develop a deeper connection to their physiology, to their body, even before we start working on the thoughts. We start working on kind of what's happening as far as like negative belief or negative cognition or blocking beliefs or whatever that is, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but it's certainly complicated. But I am a real proponent of helping clients tap into what's happening in their physiology. That can often be very difficult for people to do when they, again, are just kind of like a white knuckling through their day to day. You asked a beautiful question around if you grew up with this message that your emotions didn't matter, how do you begin to practice engaging your emotional health, emotional well-being, right? And I see that a lot too, certainly, as like what good does it do me to explore, the emotional world? Like, how is that actually going to be helpful for me? In some of my clients, like I work with some first responders, to engage their emotions is actually quite dangerous in their jobs. So it's difficult for them to then come back into, let's say, their relational dynamic and, experience connection. Like when I work with couples, we really try to practice that in session. And the reason, like the why behind that is engaging your emotions is relationally incredibly important. It's relationally incredibly important. It fosters connection. It fosters intimacy. That is 1000% research. It increases the health of our relationship with ourselves as well. The more that I understand myself, the more regulated I am in all parts of my life, right? The more that I am showing up authentically in all parts of my life. And again, it has a very real correlation around adverse health impacts. So, all of this I think is so deeply related. So again, often what I try to do in the therapeutic space is mirror and model what it looks like to hold space for someone when they are sharing their emotions. It's kind of like what happened to me, right? In my own therapeutic space, when I share with someone and they validate, they make room for, these are, again, these kind of micro moves that are deeply powerful.
Yeah. And one thing that comes to mind, especially when you talk about kind of like the white knuckling, is just that survival mode. Especially if you have been in an environment where your needs weren't getting met and you do go into this sort of survival mode, and then that becomes inadvertently kind of like a sense of safety. And so you want to get out of survival mode, but it also feels scary to do so. And so what I'm thinking or what I'm hearing is when you talk about kind of that relational healing, and I don't know if it's a bond, but having that relationship where you kind of help to get to know yourself in relation with other people, that is really eye-opening.
Yeah.
And especially when I'm thinking about at least a lot of listeners that I know that are higher achievers, who are people who also don't like to ask for help.
Yes.
It goes back to kind of that vulnerability and scared of being vulnerable, but they don't want to ask for help and they are in this survival mode and there's a lack of self-compassion. So they're hard on themselves.
Yeah.
I'm curious just how that works in like a practical sense to kind of put down the sword, put down the armor, and allow space for sort of having that relationship, or at least having the space for that relational healing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we have to recognize that when we are white knuckling, when we are operating in survival mode, for some people it is what they had to do at some point. They had to do it. And then they don't know, when they no longer necessarily have to do it, how to not do it, how to not engage from that place, right? If you are struggling with your basic needs, I think that's another category per se. But I think so often people who have their basic needs met, they are still operating in that kind of survival mode. We have to recognize that it is expending a very significant amount of energy. And it really behooves us to learn how to operate more in what I would describe, not clinically, as operating in flow. Like what it actually means to operate more in flow, as opposed to again, this white knuckle, this kind of survival. So I think it's really important for them to see, like, just start to get curious about the value of it. Like what that actually could look like again for them in their lives. Would they be, again, more creative? Would they be able to solve problems maybe in ways that are more effective for them? Would they be able to have healthier relationships with their partners or with their children or with the people in their life? Right? Like, again, sort of recognize that there is a cost to this kind of survival mode. So once we can get their buy-in, right? Like buy-in around like a motivation to shift, I think that's where we now have to practice. We have to practice perhaps what it looks like. And maybe the practice just starts in the therapeutic space. Often I get, clients who hardly ever cry, emote tears. They are emotive in that way. They cry, they are weepy in the therapeutic space. And it feels foreign, feels unfamiliar. And so often what is unfamiliar to us, the nervous system says, like, is this okay? Is this safe? Right? And the reality is just because it is unfamiliar does not mean it's not good. And what they maybe start to notice is there's a relief in them. There's a relief in sharing something. And just giving ourselves permission to say that thing that I won't tell anybody. Or communicate that this is something that I've been carrying.
Yeah.
Like there's often this question that I share with people. It's like, it's the 3 H's. Do you want to be heard? Do you want to be helped? Or do you want to be hugged? Right? And so it's so often I don't need to necessarily have this solved for me. But maybe I just need to be heard. Or maybe I just need to be hugged in this moment. And that in and of itself is a relief. So the more I think we can kind of move in these ways that are flow-based as opposed to survival-based, then again, we find ourselves operating more authentically. When we're operating more authentically, we are less activated. We're engaging relationships less in threat response. We are more able, again, to meet people where they are, show up in ways that are like in tune with our longing rather than fear. So it's like, are we operating out of fear versus love? So often we're operating out of fear. What does it look like to really practice operating out of love? It's very powerful.
Yeah.
Big
That's
shift.
so powerful. And I think the thing that hit me just then was it really comes down to a level of awareness that I think a lot of people don't tap into. It sounds like it's a high level of mindfulness to know, what do you need? Do you need a hug right now? Do you need to be heard right now?
That's true.
And if it is a level of mindfulness or awareness that helps people to get to know themselves with that kind of honesty and grace, then how do they start to get into that flow state? Or, where it's just out of survival and more into flow?
It's a great question. I would say the practice of slowing down. Schedule less, over budget your time. Schedule less, over budget your time. It's the practice of slowing down. It's not easy. I think obviously there are so many things that often need to get done. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity, like maybe we say yes to too many things. Like I always say, like my 4 tenets of self-compassion, if I were to like boil those down to like some really practical elements, the first is say no. Say no. It's ask for help. It's difficult to over budget time or schedule less if we're not engaging these things. So say no, ask for help, access warmth. What I mean by access warmth is access some tenderness every now and then. Maybe it's, a conversation with a friend and that just feels like soul care. Maybe it's like hugging a child, hugging your pet. It's like physical contact with your partner or whatever that looks like. So it's accessing warmth. It's reading a card that just reminds you of connection. And the fourth is take space. And take space means like engage something restorative that is just you. It's just you. So grabbing, just your favorite cup of coffee or tea and just looking at the leaves, going for a walk, taking a longer than usual shower, doing your skincare in a way that's really intentional. So those are like my 4 practical sort of steps around self-compassion. They're not necessarily easy, so I really do encourage clients to practice them. Practice means I will likely fumble through this. But the more reps I have that are successful, the more my body says, this is good. The more that I experience success in something, the more that I'm going to want to engage it.
It sounds like when you're going through the 4 steps, it is almost counterintuitive in a way, where if you are, white knuckling through and you're a high performer, the one thing you don't want to do is take space, for example, even though that's a thing that you should do, right? And I think that goes back kind of to the mindfulness and awareness, which is you do need to take space. You do need to offer yourself that grace. And I'm also curious, for people who are kind of struggling with connection, especially when you think about relational healing, can you explain or just give us a glimpse of what emotional safety in a relationship looks like?
A safe relationship is one that, and again, where you feel seen, heard, cared for. And so often what happens in our relational dynamics is one person, I'll just use an intimate partner relationships only because that's primarily what I work with. What we often see is that is one person gets activated, let's say, in the relationship over something. It actually could be a stressor outside of the relationship. It could be something that's happening within the relationship. When we get triggered, so often what happens for us is we then show up in our threat response. It activates our threat response behavior, fight or flight, right? Fight, I retaliate, I get hostile, I get defensive, I rage. Flight is I duck and cover, right? I hide, I run away. Then there's freeze, I go blank. Then there's fawn, people pleasing. And then there's anxiety type symptoms. I try to control all the things, then there may be numbing out, right? Or some escapism. Yeah. But what so often happens is when I get into my threat response behavior, it activates my partner's threat response behavior. So, for example, what we often see in the therapeutic space with couples is what we call the withdrawer and the pursuer dynamic. The withdrawer in the dynamic is when there is conflict or when there is like a semblance of conflict, the withdrawer goes away, right? Just, wants to exit the situation. Then there's the pursuer in the dynamic. The pursuer says, when there's a semblance of conflict, we got to talk about it. And the pursuer has all the words and wants to address it in the moment, right? But the more that they experience the withdrawer pulling away, the more the pursuer wants to double down on the pursuit. But the more that the pursuer pursues, the more withdrawer wants to double down on the withdrawal, right? So now we're just getting further and further apart. But what's beautiful is underneath both the pursuer and the withdrawer is almost the identical intention. And the intention is to preserve connection. But the withdrawer tries to preserve connection by I don't want to make this any worse. The pursuer tries to preserve the connection by let's talk about this and just figure this out right now. So what I try to help couples recognize is that oftentimes the intention of moving through this is the same, but you're operating in very different ways. Right? So as far as emotional safety, what I really try to help them talk about is what's actually underneath what we describe as the line of awareness. What's underneath their threat response behavior. Maybe the pursuer is actually feeling alone and is trying to bring their partner close. Maybe the withdrawer is feeling like a failure and just doesn't want to hear how badly they're screwing up, and so just wants to go away, right? So we try to have conversations, again, that are more vulnerable. That's not about the threat response behavior. It's what's actually happening underneath. Tell me about how you felt alone. Tell me about how you have felt not good enough. When we can have those more vulnerable conversations, it's so much more rich. And it's my job to help each person in the partner relationship speak about those things in a way that can feel safe and model for the partner how to hold it. The more that they can really practice having those conversations in session in a way that can be successful, it's that practice of repairing what has maybe been ruptured, right? And just gives them a little bit more confidence that they can navigate outside of the therapeutic space in a similar way.
Mm-hmm. That's actually quite interesting, because when you think of emotional safety in feeling seen or feeling heard
Yes.
and another person and in a relationship, I think you want to be on the same page. And in your example, they technically are on the same page because the intention is the same.
That's right.
So if the pursuer is like, we need to fix this now because I don't want there to be space between us, and then the other person is just like, we need space so this doesn't get worse, it's quite interesting, because even though the intention is the same, they're probably not feeling the emotional safety because one person's leaving while one person's chasing. And
That's exactly right. And so what we really try to have to help, let's say we have to help the withdrawer re-engage in a way that is mindful of their story also, right? So it's a little bit of like meeting in the middle. The pursuer has to really be aware of often how their pursuit can feel like a criticism or an attack, and what it looks like for them to recognize, to self-regulate in those moments. Maybe their partner needs 5 minutes. Maybe their partner needs a day, right? And, is committed to circling back the following day. And so they have to learn their own self-regulation in order to meet the withdrawer, in a way that can feel safe, so that we can still have these conversations, but in a way that's mindful of your wiring.
Are there other common emotional disconnects that you see among couples?
I think passivity versus the need to control, I think that can be another one, sort of like someone who's more avoidant versus someone who is less avoidant. We often have two people who are avoidant. The breakdown in relationships is often not because of the conversations that were damaging and hurtful to the relationships. It's often the conversations that were never had. It's often all the conversations that we never had, because we said to ourselves, what's the point? Or that's what I mean about sort of like two avoidant people. I think some of them can be like more solvable problems, like how one person's more organized, one person's less organized, or parenting misalignment, or extended family dynamics, right? And one person is maybe really enmeshed in their family of origin, and it's impacting how they bond in their intimate partner relationship. So there's all kinds of things.
And speaking of all kinds of things, like I know another thing when you talk about mindfulness, emotional awareness, recovery, like I know that you're trained in so many different modalities. So like EMDR, EFT, CBT, ACT, so many things.
Right.
So for people listening, can you explain what, like, let's say EMDR or EFT might look like in real life or in a session?
Sure. So EMDR is a type of therapeutic framework that is designed to reprocess trauma. So essentially to move trauma from maybe where it is stuck in the amygdala or in fight or flight into the frontal cortex, right? That we can shift it into a place where we actually have some reason around it. So what we do in EMDR is, if it's virtual with clients, it's very different than talk therapy. I'm essentially moving clients through a script. What I do is I ask them, what is kind of like the theme of like what you're noticing, like as far as where you get stuck? Is there a particular negative cognition that you find to be limiting for you? Like we talk about limiting beliefs. It's another way to put it, right? Is there a particular negative cognition? And then we'll go through, let's say, like a list of negative cognitions, and they'll find one that's like particularly charged. And then we'll go through what EMDR describes as float back memories. I'll ask them, when was the first time that you felt this way? When was the worst time you felt this way? When was the most recent time that you felt this way? And then we will choose one of those memories to essentially reprocess. And so what I do is the first part is I essentially like activate the client by asking them to describe just a few sentences, like something sensory about that particular memory. Then I ask them how distressing it feels. So maybe they'll tell me it feels like a 6. We call it SUDS, like units of distress. And then I'll ask them what they would like to believe about themselves. It's a positive cognition. And then I ask them, how valid is that for you at this moment? And they might say it too. Right? And then again, we're in the process of activating them. I ask them what emotions they feel, what's the body sensation. And then we go through the process of desensitization, where it's either through tapping, through sensors, through eye movements, that I ask them essentially to go into that place. They don't have to say a word to me. They don't essentially say anything to me, but I ask them to go in, and then I will ask them to pause and tell me what they notice, just very briefly. And then we continue that throughout, essentially until they start to experience some desensitization. And then what we do is we try to install the positive cognition, also through like a somatic lens, through whether it be tapping, the sensory component, or eye movement. It's quite fascinating. And again, what we often say in EMDR is we can do a lot with a little, meaning they don't really have to share too much with a therapist. So much of it is happening internally for them, and I'm really facilitating the process. When there are blocks, I do try to help them remove blocks, but it's highly effective, I have seen, particularly with trauma. So that's EMDR. And EFT, emotion-focused therapy, is a little bit of what I talked about before, where I really ask clients to look at what are some of the things in their day-to-day that they experience as triggers, right? And in the trigger, what it essentially looks like in the nervous system is some kind of threat. It can be real threat or perception of threat. And it's generally a threat to one or more of 3 things: threat to our feelings of love, threat to our feelings of safety, or threat to our feelings of belonging. Anytime we are experiencing threat, real or perceived, to one or more of those 3 things, we go into our threat response behavior. So what I try to help clients do is identify triggers. What are their typical threat response behaviors? But then underneath that, I really try to help them tap into what we describe as pain stories, PAIN stories. So it's as if, like, if you could imagine this with me, it's when they experience a trigger, it's as if somebody put a t-shirt on them, and the t-shirt has an I am statement. And the I am statement usually goes something like this. I am not good enough. I am a failure. I am unworthy of love. I am unlovable. I am rejected. I am alone. Like, these are not pretty stories, right? Which is why the body says, yeah, let's not talk about those stories. They're too vulnerable. They're too tender. Let's just do our threat response behavior, because we know that will work, right? But what we also know about threat response behaviors is that they are not sustainably effective. Over time, they keep us disconnected from ourselves and from the people that we love. So what I try to help people really tap into is getting more familiar with their pain stories. Generally, we don't have 15 different pain stories running around. We've got like 1 or 2 that have been with us for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to help them really look at what are the origins of some of those pain stories. And then we try to tend to them, reframe, speak back to them with compassion. The more that we can engage our pain stories as they come to us, the less we're going to feel like we have to armor up, right? And the more that we can put down our armor, the more we are showing up authentically in our day-to-day. That's a very brief, super fast explanation of EFT.
The one thing I love about that is the reminder that it is a mind-body connection.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people think going to talk therapy, it's like I'm just going to sit here and talk about my feelings. But that's what I love about that is you're not working on just the mind. It's all the trauma, big T, little t, that's stored within the body as well.
Yeah.
That's so, so powerful. I know that we are at time, but I just wanted to ask if you could leave our listeners with one message, one main takeaway for today, what would it be?
I think it is just that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of connection. You're worthy of care. That you are worthy. And so many of us did not receive that message explicitly. And so it's something I really want people to practice receiving. It's that they are worthy of love and they're worthy of care and they're worthy of, anything that's coming up for them being tended to. And it starts with us. It starts with us doing our own work.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you again for joining us today.
Absolutely, Casey. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.